I was buying cannabis based on sativa or indica, you know, and that is how everyone sells it, and that approach is married with a whole bunch of misinformation. Cannabinoids, they're terpenes, and they're flavonoids. Mm-hmm. We've been interacting with cannabis for about 5,000 years, and there's unique ways that we interact with cannabis. And we've learned that slowly over thousands of years. We smoke or we eat or we do certain things to get certain results. Mm-hmm. And those results have been proven true, kind of like you would say, the lineage to yogic practices. Over time, we see the positive, and then over time, we also see maybe the challenges. Yeah. And so it's the same with cannabis as a product. Well, today we have all this science which supports plant medicine, cannabis medicine, but it also can really inform the way that as a recreational user we use the product. And the disruption is where the magic is here, because not only is it disrupting the central nervous system, it's also disrupting the brain.
Welcome to this new episode, and today I am here with Corey. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you very much.
Very nice. So Corey is a cannabis educator, which means today we're going to talk about weed. Wow, which is in Koh Phangan and in Thailand now is really a big thing. So first of all, Corey, what is your story in life?
I grew up in a cult with my parents. There was 6 kids. It was a unique upbringing, you might say. And it was a little bit problematic in my early teenage years as I moved away from this really cloistered and confined space. And in my process of expansion, I traveled fairly far into the realms of drug use and parties and trying to find some sort of balance to my life and purpose and meaning. And cannabis was a huge part of my youth. I've been using cannabis probably since my teenage years. It was really an adaptive tool for me to cope with the emotional traumas and other stuff that all of us have. It was just the way I chose to deal with it. And I was quite an active, athletic guy. I was always very busy with some sport. I raced bicycles for a while. I was really into that. Practiced yoga for a long time. And eventually, I think these yogic practices finally had some sort of effect on me. It took a long, long time. Mm-hmm. Wasn't really interested at all in anything that was termed spiritual. Mm-hmm. This was just kind of like a warning sign for me. Men and women and religious power were things that I tried to stay away from for a long time. But eventually my practice just kind of opened me up to a different way of thinking, I think, mm-hmm. and this idea of awareness and bringing that into your life and truly trying to perceive some of the reasons behind the choices and decisions I was making was powerful for me. And so I dedicated myself to that for a number of years. Really the physical benefits of yoga were super important to me for a long time. And that got me through most of my adult life. And about 8 years ago, I got in quite a serious accident. I was training on my bike and a car ran a stop sign and hit me while I was in the intersection. And I got pretty significantly injured. Mm-hmm. So I broke a couple vertebrae in the back and I broke some ribs and I got a brain injury. And I was really opposed to the idea of using opiates as a management tool during my recovery. And so I defaulted to what I knew best at the time, which was cannabis. I was very concerned about how I was going to be ingesting cannabis to get the best medicinal benefits. So primarily I was looking for pain relief, muscle relaxation, some other things specific to healing. And it led me into a little bit of a rabbit hole of how cannabis actually works. And I found a lot of passion there. I'm a bit of a nerd, so I really like digging deep into, some of the explanations for these effects. And I spent a couple years managing my symptoms. It took me about 2 years to get over my initial recovery, and then the remaining years now even bringing me to where I'm at today. I'm returning to where I was physically before, so my practice is even returning to the place it was. So that eventually took me into a career path, which was a little bit different than what I had been doing. I'd been working in the digital advertising space for a while. I was a corporate trainer for a while. And when I realized that there was a posting from the provincial government looking for cannabis employees, I applied, and I thought potentially it could be a good opportunity for me. And it turned out to be. The provincial government has exceptional training for a lot of their staff. So I got the first kind of structured cannabis training some years ago that I had ever really received, and I loved that. It completely changed the way I was looking at this product.
Cool.
Yeah.
So Canada, of course, legalized weed quite a while back. Before we go into cannabis fully, I'm interested in your background, being brought up in a cult.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if you feel like sharing a little bit more the details of this cult and anything about it, because it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating in its own way. It's problematic too for people who've been through these experiences. Ultimately, we all have something in life that we're dealing with, and this was just my particular cross to bear, I guess you might say. My parents were really very, very strict in their viewpoints about the world. That included everything from your relationships to other people. We should have keep our kind of association within this particular community, no real searching outside of it. And those types of restrictions and limited beliefs were really difficult to overcome. And so as a young man in my early teenage years, I left my parents' home and kind of went out on my own, not knowing the world in its real condition, because I was so separated from it. And I think that introduction into freedom was tied with a lot of negative behaviors. And those negative behaviors were just ways that I had tried to cope with trying to be present in this very dramatically different environment of the real world, as opposed to this segregated community. Okay. So yeah, that was a bit challenging, and I mean, ultimately it led me where I am today. It did instill in me a desire to maybe learn more about what could possibly be influencing humanity, something bigger than us in general. And even though I was opposed to this idea of like organized religion in any way, I still kind of wanted to know if there was more. Somehow there must be more meaning, there must be a true purpose, there must be something like that. And I mean, ultimately, yogic philosophy has filled in a lot of those details for me and made me understand how I can feel more complete. But yeah, it was challenging. I don't know that it's so much different than anyone else who has their own families, ideals to deal with. But it was challenging for me. Yeah.
But it's interesting indeed, because of course you are a KohPhangan guy. I mean, you are part of the community, etc. So there is the aspect of you which is knowledgeable about weed, and your think starting a sort of an operational business within it. But also, I think it's useful to us to know that you have this kind of background, which is more esoteric or interesting in a way, because the two things combined make you very credible in the community, I think. Is that right?
Oh, well, I mean, thank you. I don't know. I mean, I have a practice, a spiritual practice, and it's really important to the way I lead my life. My spiritual practice, if you could call it, in the early days was mainly, these physical asanas as they are associated with yoga. And, now I'm at a place in my life where I realize that asanas are great and they're important, but they're such a small component of what, if we term yoga, what that really is. And as a way of life, the way I relate with you and with other people has to be informed with more awareness and informed with more of my own motivations and my own reasons for doing things. And we call it the conscious community, right? Because it's just a whole bunch of us working really, really hard to do some of these things, right? But yeah, that's kind of where I fit in, and it's comfortable here.
Okay, so let's get into it now. So first of all, I think people might know that a few months ago, the Thai government changed regulation around the use of marijuana. So we can start from that one, right? Mm-hmm. What can you tell us about it?
Well, first of all, I had no idea that cannabis was legal in Thailand when I came here. I was in residence at a Zen center in New Mexico in the United States, and studying and living there. And I just felt like I needed something different. It was time for me to move. And so I opened up Google and I searched for flights to 3 of the places I thought I wanted to go. One was India, one was Bali, and one was Koh Phangan. And I found a first-class flight for under $1,000 that brought me all the way to Koh Samui. So I just bought the ticket, and that's how I ended up here. And when I landed on the island, 2 things happened. Number one, I felt complete all of a sudden, almost. I love the energy. This feeling of acceptance and stuff that's on the island is super powerful. But I also realized that cannabis was legal. And I had deliberately avoided working in the industry for the last couple of years just because I've been traveling. I've been around other communities. I was in Mexico for quite a while during COVID. And the fact that it was legal here, I don't know, it began to influence the way that I was thinking, because it's really important to me that people understand how cannabis works. And the way that I learned how cannabis works really influenced how I use cannabis. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, wow, well, maybe there's an opportunity for me to do a little bit of what I used to do.
Because you got experience, you got the knowledge, and now it's happening here in Thailand, so it's legal. And you say awareness is very important in life in general. I suppose awareness when you use stimulants of any types as well, because they can be life-enhancing in a certain way when used correctly, or can be maybe not so good if they're not used properly, right?
Well, I mean, isn't this true of everything in life, right?
Indeed. Indeed.
Right? So we're all trying to find some balance of usage. It's really important that people know that I have absolutely nothing against cannabis use. I'm a regular cannabis user. But I'm also about awareness in our use of cannabis.
Yes.
And so, cannabis can be a potentially safe product, and it can be a potentially unsafe product. And depending on who you speak to, they're going to push you from one side of this pole to the other. And ultimately, my hope is that people just make a good decision based on what they know. Yeah. And so if I can give more information, then people will understand what that really looks like. I mean, it's the same with alcohol, it's the same with tobacco, it's the same with many other stimulants or drugs that we use, right? The more informed we are, the better we can make good decisions.
Okay, so now we have many dispensaries and weed shops all over the island. Selling all sort of different kind of weed. Some are local strains, some are imports. So there's a whole sort of industry developing on the back of it. And so how do you fit in within this sort of context?
Well, maybe I should start with a scenario. You know, a typical scenario was I would walk into a local cannabis retailer and I would say, do you have product A or do you have product B? And many times their response was just a blank look. They didn't know, or even about the qualities of the plant itself. For instance, you know, do you have this particular strain, or is this particular product that you're showing me right now, is this more relaxing or is it more energizing? And all of that information was mostly missing.
Yeah.
And so as a consumer, I don't know how I can, never mind make a good choice, I don't even know how I can make a choice. There is a lot of retailers creating new projects in this particular space, and a lot of them are going to want to know how to operate in a conscious way.
Yes. Okay.
You know,
so that's why how you can help them. Basically.
That's how I can help. You know, and at the moment, you know, it consists of education and really a community-focused approach. That's really what I try to encourage people to think about, because we are all members of this interrelating community. And so the more support we can give those around us, the healthier the entire community is going to be.
Yeah.
And so if I work with a retailer, if I work with anyone, at the moment, these are all potentials. You know, it's really where I hope to be going, certainly in a more detailed way in the future. But working with them to understand the product as well. And then once they can understand the product, they can make better decisions about the type of organic products, like the cannabis flowers themselves, for instance, that they buy, how those flowers have been treated, what the potential intoxication outcomes are, but also the potential maybe risk factors are. And then they can make better decisions. They can be more confident about what they're doing. They can be accountable to their community, and everyone, our entire level of education and awareness rises as a community.
Very nice. So simply, what are the sort of characteristics that we should look at when making a decision about cannabis? So I know the basic, I know not so much, to be honest. I know the basic, which is the sativa and the indica, but I think you're telling me there's more components or more aspects of weed that are important. Can you just go through some of them, please?
You know, for most of my cannabis, you know, life, I was buying cannabis based on sativa or indica, you know. That is how everyone sells it, and you know, that approach is married with a whole bunch of misinformation. You know, we've got all this kind of like bro science behind cannabis. It does this, it does that. You know, you have to do this, you have to do that, and it's quite eye-opening to realize how cannabis actually impacts the body. Mm-hmm. And you know, we've been interacting with cannabis for about 5,000 years, and there's unique ways that we interact with cannabis, and we've learned that slowly over thousands of years. We smoke, or we eat, or we do certain things to get certain results, and those results have been proven true, kind of like you would say, you know, the lineage to yogic practices. Over time, we see the positive. And then over time, we also see maybe the challenges. Yeah. And so it's the same with cannabis as a product. Well, today we have all this science which supports plant medicine, cannabis medicine. But it also can really inform the way that as a recreational user, we use the product. Cannabis primarily delivers, you know, you could say physiological effects as a result of three ingredients. They're cannabinoids, they're terpenes, and they're flavonoids. And those particular ingredients and the amounts of those particular ingredients are actually something that we can pretty easily see and discern and smell and interact with in these, what we see here in Thailand, which is primarily dried cannabis flower. And so, you know, part of what I'm doing is trying to encourage people to be more aware of how every individual flower smells that they're exposed to, how every individual flower looks. Appearance is incredibly important when it comes to cannabis. You know, cannabis is a plant. We choose vegetables and flowers and all kinds of things based on appearance because we understand that that traditionally links back to the health of the plant itself.
Yeah, like a nice red tomato with a certain smell is a lot more appealing than maybe some yellowish tomato that looks plastic, right?
Right, it's a lot more appealing.
Normal.
But why did we get to this place in 2023 where that is more appealing? And the reason for that is because over hundreds of years, the body understood that there was more nutritional content, perhaps, or whatever those reasons were. There were real reasons behind, as a culture, why we do things a certain way. And with plant health, we tie that in almost everything we do. And it would be a mistake if we didn't consider plant health and cannabis as well. And so when we're looking at cannabis flower at a dispensary, we just need to learn what is a healthy flower. What does that actually look like? What are the signs of an unhealthy or poorly treated or contaminated flower? And so firstly, appearance. Appearance is super important. And then the aromatic profile. So the actual aroma of the cannabis itself. Have you ever had a bath with lavender?
I had some aromatherapy massage, lavender,
okay.
I think.
I mean, I don't have a lot of baths in Thailand. It's pretty hot here. But in Canada, I used to love a bath, right? And adding some kind of aroma to the water typically has a physiological side effect.
Sure.
And it's also the reason we make decisions about what we eat or spicy food in Thailand versus, another flavor. So the aroma actually is tied to a physiological effect, just like it is in some other foods. And plant medicine is a really good way that we can understand lots of these concoctions that our grandparents or great-great-great-grandparents used to make. Were just ways for them to deliver these products, and aroma was the way that they knew they were doing it right.
Yeah.
So aroma in cannabis is tied back to the terpenes, and the terpenes and a little bit of the effects of the flavonoids. And so we can begin to correlate unique aromatic profiles with actual intoxication outcomes.
Yeah.
And so that's important to understand.
Okay, so that's the terpenes also are important, so not just the indica and the sativa. The indica tends to be more the relaxing one, the sativa a little bit more stimulating, right? And then you said flavonoids. When I think of flavonoids, I think of nutrition. It's a category of antioxidants that I studied in food indeed.
Yeah.
And these in cannabis too, right?
Yes, yeah. And in fact, there are unique flavonoids in cannabis called cannaflavins. And they are recognized as being powerful potential medicinal ingredients, and antioxidant properties are tied back to these cannaflavins. I do think it's important just to back up about the whole sativa and indica conversation and just realize that these are genetic classifications of plants. And we don't actually see pure indica or pure sativa genetic profiles in the industry today. Okay. What we see in the industry today is a collection of genes that have been bred specifically for a specific aromatic cannabinoid or flavonoid outcome.
Okay.
And so we look at the flowers primarily, try to discern their aroma primarily. We might even be able to discern a flavor profile by the residue that's left on our fingers if we have a chance to interact with them. And that is a much better way to understand how we're going to be potentially feeling.
Okay.
Yeah, so aroma is an interesting thing, but it's tied directly back to these chemical profiles. Terpenes are organic chemicals that are in most plants and herbs and vegetation around us. One of the most popular is pinene. Pinene is in pine trees. Another very popular terpene is caryophyllene, as we find it in cannabis. And it has some of this peppery odor or scent. And it's super powerful because it actually engages with cannabinoid receptors in the body and causes physiological effects.
Okay, so it affects your eye as well, basically.
Absolutely, it affects the eye.
And then, of course, another broad spectrum categorization of cannabis is like you have the THC versus the CBD, right? So these are types of cannabinoids that are present in the plant itself. And we know CBD makes you more relaxed, doesn't really give you any sort of like high as we know it. It's more like bring you into the body if you want. So lots of relaxation and feeling good and relaxed. Whilst the THC is the one that makes you creative or makes you experience life quite remarkably differently, right?
Yeah, cannabis is what we call a psychoactive compound, I guess you could say. And we use a term in cannabis called the entourage effect quite often in the industry. And what we're referring to is the way that cannabinoids and terpenes and flavonoids interact with each other to create some sort of outcome. And it's true, THC and CBD, they're like these two great big cannabinoids in the industry and everyone talks about them. You know, they're just two of maybe over 120 cannabinoids that can potentially exist. But THC is definitely like, you know, the big weightlifter in the room. He's massive and he's got lots of power and he's very persuasive in the effects, if you think of it. And CBD is super powerful because it doesn't actually have a psychoactive component. It has the physiological components without the psychoactivity. And it's also really important because it provides neuroprotection to the brain when we are dosing our receptors with THC. Okay. So together, CBD and THC are believed to create possibly a little bit of a neuroprotective combination when it comes to that interaction that happens in the brain. But there's lots of other cannabinoids like CBN and CBG and CBC, and these other cannabinoids provide a lot of the therapeutic benefit of the plant. In fact, if we go back to this idea of plant medicine and why were we using plants to start with, you know, just out of sheer effort, we gradually found what was working for us. Well, we can actually break down why that works, and in cannabis we can see where the properties are in all of these cannabinoids that provide, for instance, resistance to carcinogens or anti-inflammatory processes or whatever else happens. So there is a whole host of cannabinoids and they all interact in unique ways. Some primarily influence how others work, and then some primarily influence how that endocannabinoid system in the body works and the receptors, how they work. Some of those cannabinoids reduce the amount of active ingredient that the receptor can absorb, and some increase the potential for that receptor to absorb. And then we add terpenes to the mix and they do something similar, and then we add flavonoids to the mix and they do something similar. The great thing is that there is a synergy between certain flavor profiles, certain color profiles, and certain cannabinoid profiles. And so with a little bit of practice, we can get actually really quite good at not only identifying which flower might be the healthiest, but also identifying how it's going to make us feel simply by smell and sight. Every time you helping somebody with plants versus a multivitamin or some sort of lab-made supplements, the plant comes with a whole host of different balances in a way. So typically if you take, vitamin C from a food grade, supplement, you have a higher bioavailability, which means that the body retains more of the good stuff. And it's not just vitamin C as ascorbic acid made in the lab. If you're eating an apple, there's many other things, other flavonoids or, phytonutrients, we call them, that make the apple a very compelling and very effective multivitamin in a way or another. So that's exactly, it happens the same with cannabis, right? Exactly. Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
what do you think then? I mean, let's look at how to take cannabis into the body.
If we're looking for nutrients in plants, it would appear that almost always consuming the whole plant in some fashion tends to be the best delivery method
Yes.
for absorption and utilization. And that only makes sense. I mean, we've been here for how many hundreds of thousands of years, evolving slowly in relationship to the fauna and flora around us. So it makes perfect sense, actually. And it's totally true with cannabis too. It's also the reason cannabis is so challenging. It's really challenging because we've got legislation in the United States, for instance, which restricts the amount of cannabis research that can be done. And then there's just so many compounds that can potentially be active, and we have so little research on so much of them that it's hard to understand. So the best thing, I think, is to go back to how do we interact with plants and plant medicine in general.
Yes.
That seems to provide us with some of the most beneficial and consistent results. And that's typically in a whole plant kind of format.
Whole food and whole plants, whole
Yeah.
supplements, herbal supplements.
Yeah.
Great, right?
Right. And now the wrench in the mix a little bit is that we're smoking this product. Primarily, it's the number one way people interact with cannabis. I think in the United States, there was a study in 2019, over 22% of the American population had smoked cannabis within that study period. So, I mean, number one way we interact with cannabis, and linked with, smoking is combustion. And some of those side effects are not pleasant necessarily, but it is a very effective way to interact with the active ingredients in cannabis.
And quickly, right?
And very, very quickly,
Yeah.
right? Because intoxication sets in within about a minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. Some of us, we may not really become aware of what's happening in the body, but that's basically boils down to awareness. It's not about the active ingredient not being.
And that's the base of everything. That's what we established early on in the interview, right?
Right.
Awareness means also that maybe you are feeling the effect of cannabis and you can modulate it, or you can make the experience of being intoxicated, as you call it, better in a way, or you can kind of lead it to a certain way, which awareness means seeing, observing, and at the same time letting it happen. So not trying to over control it, right? It's a balance between the control and then the let go, where you are almost from a higher perspective, an observer of what you are feeling and experiencing, right?
Exactly.
And in cannabis that works very well if you know how to be very present when you take it.
And if you know what's happening, right? So, there is, a little bit of a dispute about whether we should be leading with the body or leading with science. Some people say, well, the body tells you everything you need to know. And that might be true to some degree, but actually sometimes the more we learn about something, the more we understand the intuitive nature of what the body is really looking for. And so the same thing is true with cannabis. There's a host of cannabis products, from flower to edibles, all kinds of different edibles, to highly concentrated products like oils, to really thick oils that are designed to be eaten primarily, to really high concentrated terpene profile oils which are designed to be smoked, all kinds of them really, right? But at the end of the day, no matter how we consume cannabis, we believe anyway that the more complete the concentration of cannabis ingredients are, that the more beneficial some of those end results are going to be.
Okay.
And so how we choose it, it's important to know the difference between how edibles work in the body versus inhalants, for instance. When we consume cannabis, the THC has to go through the stomach and through the liver and be transformed, and it gets transformed to this product called 11-hydroxy-THC. And that's about 2 times as strong as inhaled THC. And so we hear a lot about some of the negative side effects of edibles, and we haven't done a very good job of delivering edibles in a format where we can control dose. And dose is actually really key to all positive outcomes when it comes to cannabis. So regardless of how we choose to interact with cannabis, the more we know about the flavonoids and the terpenes and the cannabinoids, the better understanding we can have about the physical effects. And then the more we know about how the body deals with those ingredients, the better we can understand what's actually happening. When we consume cannabinoids, no matter how we consume them, once they become active in the body, they interact with two very powerful receptors. We call them CB1 and CB2. And CB2 receptors are primarily grouped in the brain and throughout the central nervous system. And then CB2 receptors are primarily grouped throughout the organs and the skin and the remainder of the body. And so as cannabis interacts with those two different receptors, we get a variety of different results. But one of the results we get is we get a dysregulation of the central nervous system, right? And so, and remember, you know, these receptors are also attached to organs. So the heart, the lungs, the liver, the kidneys, all of the organs in our body, including the skin, are influenced by the way that cannabinoids, and typically it's the endo or the human created cannabinoids that are influencing the physiological process. But now we're throwing these phytocannabinoids or plant derived cannabinoids into the mix. And so if we feel a certain way after we've smoked or ingested cannabis, one of the potential ways to have a little more awareness or understand what's happening is just to stop for a second and explore how we're feeling.
Sure.
Yeah, and we don't always do that. You know, we might be sitting in a group or at a dinner or around the fire, someone lights a joint and they start passing it around. And we're distracted, we're busy, we're talking, we're laughing. Quite often, we're also ingesting alcohol and other drugs. And we lose the ability to be really present with the disruption. And the disruption is where the magic is here, because not only is it disrupting the central nervous system, it's also disrupting the brain. It's disrupting all of our sensories. All the ways that we interact with the environment around us are now a little bit different. And that's where the potential is for maybe an improvement in awareness or a growth in our awareness or a better understanding. Sometimes people have really potent and magical experiences where they're able to question their own decision making, or there's a reduction in the ego a little bit where we have the ability to kind of look inward once in a while and say, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? And that's all as a result of the psychoactivity of these particular types of products.
What you say is really wonderful. I really agree. And I think that potentially you could have a joint and then drink alcohol and eat a pizza and play a video game. And that's possibly not my favorite way of experiencing life in general, but particularly experiencing weed.
Actually, this isn't new information for us either, right? Because we've been using cannabis in ritualized ways for a long time. In fact, the original studies, original historical references to cannabis typically come from ceremonial or ritualized use.
Yeah.
So, for instance, tantric rituals used to incorporate cannabis. So there's lots of other ceremonies around the world that we've all been exposed to in the plant medicine community now, where different indigenous communities have used these types of ingredients in ritualized ways. And thanks to a whole bunch of research around psychedelics and how they work, we also understand set and setting, the real prominent and powerful influence that the environment and our emotional readiness play when it comes to changing the way we perceive reality around us in a super powerful way with like psychedelics, or in what you could say is a more limited way with psychoactive ingredients like cannabinoids and terpenes.
And okay, before we move on to the final question, which is what are you going to do in KohPhangan? What are your plans? I'd like to ask you if is there any kind of like place in KohPhangan where you might recommend it's where we can learn more about weed at the moment? I mean, let's say that you want to become a connoisseur and you want to learn about weed. Is there any space in KohPhangan that provides this education?
Not that I know of yet. From a commercial perspective, we've got lots of stores trying to sell different products. I hope to be a part of an educational movement, here in Thailand. I hope to play a part. Maybe it's going to be a small, limited part here in KohPhangan. That's fine with me too, because there's a little bit of purpose tied here for me, and I get to feel like I can potentially make a difference in people's lives in a positive way by sharing what I know. And so over the next months and hopefully years here in KohPhangan and in Thailand, I hope to help support individual retailers who want to become what I think is a part of a conscious use movement when it comes to plant medicines, specifically cannabis. And so, I hope to be able to be involved in a consulting format. I've written an online course, which is now in English. I'm actually intending to launch that in Thai, not in English, but I'm also here on the island and I'm available all the time. And but I really hope to be a part of this, and I'm not really sure how that's going to look. I've done my own ceremonies and rituals to try to manifest the type of existence I want to have here, and I'm not really sure how it's going to look at the end of the day. What I do know is that retailers who understand how cannabis works are more profitable, and they're more successful in the environment because they become a trustworthy source for consumers. And it's the one thing that we're really missing, right? Let's say that you want to use cannabis in a ritualized or ceremonial way. So you go to the local retailer, and you may not share what you're using it for, depending, but you might say, hey, look, I want to have a romantic evening with my partner, or we're doing this or we're doing that. What should I choose? And primarily they're going to sell you something that has high THC, or something that they're really profitable in selling, or whatever, right? And that doesn't really work with what we're trying to do. What would work a lot better is, what particular strain do you have that's not going to put me to sleep? What's not going to inhibit sexual function?
Yes.
What's not going to, right? And they won't know the answers to that because, number one, they don't understand how the endocannabinoid system is disrupted. And then number two, they don't know the science behind terpenes, right? So they don't know which terpenes are really stimulating, which are overstimulating, which are increasing the absorption of THC, which are just sedative. There's a terpene called linalool, which is the terpene behind lavender, one of the most sedative terpenes in cannabis. So there's an opportunity for unique resellers to really become experts in their own right. And I can support that. That's this particular science is called, I'm called a terpener in certain circles, like the science of terpenes and how they relate to outcome. And that's really the bulk of how we can use cannabis as consumers to get the right outcome. So it's an important detail.
Well, sounds very good. Corey, thank you very much for sharing all this information and knowledge and passion for this specific magical plant that is indeed historically relevant, is been part of the counterculture, the 60s, the 70s, and it took decades literally to legalize it. It was always, this push legalize, and now in Thailand they've done it. So well done, to the Thai people for, of course, taking on this project and realizing it. So cannabis is indeed legal here, and I wish you the best for what you're going to do on the island, and thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.